On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Olympics are here!
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, July the 26th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms, and I've been waiting for Canada to make the damn Olympics on the men's side for 24 seasons, baby, but we're here. We're talking men, we're talking women, we're talking Olympics today. It's all very exciting. Of course, you can find me on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. You can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord. Surely lots of Olympic talk going on in there, and not just for the basketball, of course. We're going to go and talk about fencing and diving and rowing and all of the wonderful sports the Olympics bring us, baby. It's all in the Discord. It's free to join. Please join us in the Discord. Be part of our listener community over there. It's a great place to be and hang out on the internet in a place that isn't horrible and toxic all the time. Of course, you can find the show on your favorite podcast app. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciate it when you support us on the audio side of things. You can also find us on YouTube. Subscribe to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel, and it's a wonderful thing. You get a little notification bell when you hit that bell, and you do that. You get a push notification to your device every single time the show is about to premiere or go live. And during the Olympics, we'll be talking about Canada basketball all the way through, and so you can get those episodes when we're talking Canada ball right away when the thing drops, and it's all fresh and new and all that good stuff. Anyway, thanks so much for doing that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And boy, oh boy, during the Olympics, a great time to go throw some scratch down on sports you know nothing about. Fencing, I mentioned it. Go do that. Put some money on swimming. Whatever you want to do, it's all there for you. And FanDuel is hooking up customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we will get started on an episode where I'm very excitable, and I hope I haven't scared my guest off already. It's our pal Oren Weisfeld is here. We're going to talk about the Canada men's and women's teams going into the Olympic basketball tournament. Very exciting on both sides. And Oren is a great person to talk to about this as our sort of go-to Canada basketball correspondent here on the show. He's writing a book about Canada basketball. He knows this stuff inside and out. Oren, welcome in, man. Happy Olympics.
Happy Olympics to you, Sean. Yeah, I'm excited. We're really in that North American sports lull right now. Not a whole lot going on. Other than WNBA All-Star Game was great. I'm not sure if you tuned into that at all, but other than that, it is really dry season. So I'm very excited as a sports fanatic who needs something to do at nights to get this Olympics rolling.
I don't know about you. I've had the Olympics, I would say between like 2016 and 2020. I kind of fell out of favor, maybe 2014, weird time zones, and also just like the horrors around certain Olympic games and the way they were put together or awarded or whatever.
I'm really excited too, but it'll be interesting because I hear your point on the politics of it all in the professional ranks, but nobody seems to be talking about this Olympics, and I think it could end up being a very politically charged games. And I know that's not what you brought me on to talk about, but just between like France going through an election right now, and the far right like kind of being really strong there, and like you hear Kylian Mbappe talking about it at the Euros, and then we have like wars going on in the world, and we have all of these athletes with massive platforms once you get to the podium, especially at the Olympic Games. And so I'm really curious to see how they're going to leverage those platforms, but I know that's a different podcast. And I actually think it will be really fascinating, but we're still going to get really good athletics on top of that.
Yeah, and also I shouldn't go and say that the Olympics are without, disgusting horrors of their own. It's gross. The whole thing's gross. But the athletes, they can't control the grossness of it all, and they do cool sports things that I like to watch. Speaking of cool sports things, Canada has 2 basketball teams going to the tournament on the men's and women's sides. Canada is the number 7 on the men's side, number 7 ranked in the world. They are number 2 when it comes to Vegas odds to win the whole damn thing on the men's side. Very exciting stuff. On the women's end of things, Canada a little less, I would say, in form coming into this tournament. A couple of tough exhibition losses, got blown out by Belgium by a pretty substantial margin, by 30 points in one of their tune-up games, lost to Spain as well. We're recording this on Tuesday. Canada's taking on Australia in their final tune-up game. We'll see what happens there, but it's going to be a tough road for both sides. The men in a super stacked field, the women maybe a little less favored in their group and in the women's field than you would hope they would be as the number 5 seed in the FIBA World Rankings. We're going to start just with expectations, though, or we'll get into the various pathways to making it to the medal rounds for the men's and women's teams. But expectation-wise, let's start on the men's side. We know this is a long time coming. First time in the Olympics since 2000, the golden generation, if you will, finally living up to their potential, making the Olympics, winning bronze in the World Cup last year. And as I mentioned, number 2 in the Vegas odds to win the gold medal, looked very good against France and Puerto Rico in tune-up games and seemed to be going in kind of on a high. What would you say is a reasonable level of expectation for the Canadian men going into this tournament? And like, at what point would you be disappointed with the outcome?
Yeah, I think I'd be disappointed if they didn't make it out of the group. Once you get into the knockout stages, that is, I mean, it really is anything could happen basketball, especially at this tournament, which I think on the men's side will be the most, you know, it sounds crazy to say, but I think will be the most competitive international basketball tournament of all time. I think it'll be the most stacked basketball tournament of all time. Just when you look at these teams that are merging NBA talents across the world with continuity and experience. And so once you get to those knockout stages, really anything could happen. But I think, yeah, I would be disappointed if they don't make it out of the group. It is being called the group of death with Greece, Spain, and Australia. But even though those teams are great teams and big names in international basketball with great histories, I don't think any of those teams should be favored to beat Canada. And I think as long as Canada beats 2 of them, they will move on to the next round. And I think there's a reasonable expectation that they should. In terms of like what the broader expectations are, I do think people expect this team to win a medal, whether it's fair or not. I think that comes with missing the Olympics for 24 years and going through a 24-year drought, right? Like fans are just kind of maybe getting ahead of their skis a little bit, but I also think that's completely understandable why they would after not getting to cheer on this team for so long. And now you're there, you're the second favorite team with the sports books. You have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and all your best Canadians are showing up. So I do think that's the expectation. Hey, if they have a poor shooting night and some other team goes off and they lose in the semifinals or whatever, that stuff happens. But I do think there would be some level of disappointment from certain areas of Canada if they don't get a medal.
Yeah, I think it's fair to be disappointed if they don't medal. They just medaled at the World Cup, and yes, that was a different field. The States didn't send their full team, all of that, but they are clearly one of the more talented teams going into this tournament. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Look, if this was like a Canada team without an MVP candidate in the NBA on the team, then, you know, you could say, oh, they're super deep. They have all this NBA talent, but they don't have that top end talent. Maybe it's more, you know, sort of justifiable if they crash out in the, you know, before the knockout round or whatever. But when you have a player that good, it just is basketball, right? If you have the best player, you're typically going to have an edge, and they had the best player. I mean, we'll talk about the best player in their group because that's an interesting one. I think you would argue Giannis and Shai is a bit of a toss-up considering their recent performances and all of that. You know, different cup of tea, very different players, obviously, but, you know, they have one of the best players in the entire field and a very deep roster. We'll get into some of the potential threats to their run at a medal here, but I think it's fair to go in thinking, hey, medal is a realistic thing to shoot for here. If they're 4th or 5th, I don't think you can be mad about that. It's a tough tournament, as we talked about, a very deep field. But I think anything outside of that, you can start to feel like, hey, we were a little bit let down here. We were sold a false bill of goods on this Canada team and their sort of ceiling if they're not at least in the contention, in the conversation for medals once we get to it in a couple weeks' time. On the women's side, mentioned it's been a little bit of a tougher run for them going into this tournament. They do have 4 WNBA players on the team: Bridget, Carleton, Kia Nurse, Laeticia Amihere, and Aaliyah Edwards, and I think 3 other players with WNBA experience. it's a good team, and they are number 5 in the world, but they're also in a very tough group. We'll get into their path as well. They're, again, 8th in the odds to actually win the tournament. They're not considered one of the favorites here. What do you make of the expectations for the women's team going into this tournament? They obviously are entering with a little bit less fanfare than the men because of the drought, but they, of course, have been the consistent and reliable team for Canada basketball on the senior international level for years now. And, you know, there's always the shot that they could have a bit of a surprise run here. What do you make of their chances and your sort of level of expectation for them?
Yeah, so 4 straight Olympics for the women's team. We also have the women's 3-on-3 team, which we should just briefly mention because they are medal contenders as well. They've been one of the best teams in the world for a little while. I'm not going to pretend to have deep knowledge of them, but it's fun brand of basketball, and people should tune in because that team really could win a medal. But yeah, the women's 5-on-5 team, like you said, it's tricky to judge them because the games that they've played in exhibition, which you mentioned, have been without their WNBA players. They had a 2-week training camp in Victoria where they played Portugal and beat them with basically everyone other than their WNBA players. And that's kind of the nature of this, is that the WNBA overlaps with this, and the players just got released during All-Star weekend. So they've just joined Canada really late here. I know Carleton got there last, and she only got there a couple of days ago. So they only have like a week, more or less, with their W players to integrate them into the other, I guess, 8 players on the team. And that's just like a really hard thing. And so like it's going to be hard to know exactly how good they are until we get closer to the competition and probably the first game, because even this, you know, exhibition game that they're playing earlier this week, it's going to be so quickly to integrate that it's hard to judge. But expectations, yeah, like you said, they're in this group of a bunch of teams, maybe 6 or 7 teams that could medal, could come behind Team USA, who on the women's side, it's just not even really a competition. They win every year by a ton, and that is what I expect to happen again. But Canada could certainly medal. They could also finish, you know, not even get out of the group, because it is different than the men's side. This is a younger team, and Canada basketball, or at least their head coach, Victor Lepeña, will tell you that their goal is to kind of peak in 2028. So I think even if you look at the roster, this might not be the best 12 athletes Canada has, but it is the best kind of mixing of young and old, trying to get people experience and trying to move this all in a long-term direction of peaking by 2028.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It does feel like, you know, with the youth they have, right? Aaliyah Edwards in her rookie season in the WNBA. You have Scylla Swords, 18 years old, who's going to be, you would think, a fixture of this program for a very long time. It does feel more of like a get your feet wet type of thing. And in 4 years' time, they'll be a little bit more rounded into form. Very different sort of tracks that both the men and women are on right now. But like you said, like it's probably a more open field than the sort of men's tournament is at the top, right? Like you have your sort of heavy hitters on the men's side. I think after the States, it could go pretty much any direction in terms of, you know, the weirdness of knockout basketball and all of that. We're going to get into the paths that both Canadian men and women's teams will have to go through in order to make it to the medal rounds. We'll do that coming up in just 1 second. We'll detail how the tournaments work and get into some of the biggest threats and reasons why they will or will not get to where we want to see them get to. We'll get to all that coming up in just 1 sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sportsbook in all of North America. And with the Olympics coming up, the dead time of sports in the summer is very much going to be behind us. And yeah, you can throw some money down on basketball, but there's also all the other sports at the Olympics for you to go have some fun with over at FanDuel. If you are doing the basketball thing, Canada plus 1,000 to win on the men's side. The women, a little bit of a longer shot. They are plus 4,800 over at FanDuel. But of course, you can throw your money down on anybody you want. You got happiness hedges, all that stuff that I very much advocate if you're going to go spend some money at the sports book. And FanDuel is the best place to go do it, especially in the summertime, because this summer FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and of course, the Locked On Podcast Network. Back at it here, previewing the Olympics for the men and women from the Canadian national team side and perspective on today's show with Oren Weisfeld. And yeah, let's dig into the pathways for each of these teams. Oren, we'll start with the men. 3 group games. So this is like the tournament format for, I guess we should probably lay that out so everyone kind of understands. You get 3 group games against the 3 teams that are in each of your groups. There's 3 groups of 4. The top 2 teams in each group, plus the next 2 best third place teams advance to the quarterfinals where they'll be seeded. Head-to-head is the first tiebreaker, followed by point differential, and then other tiebreakers that I don't want to get into because that will hurt my brain. So head-to-head, point differential, run up those scores. It's very important in tournament basketball. Go and, feel no shame or guilt about running up a score against an inferior opponent if you can go and do that. Winning the group with a good point differential, I think probably needs to be the goal for the Canadian men, because if you are one of the top 2 overall seeds, you get put in different pots, and those 2 teams will be on a collision course to meet in the gold medal game. One would assume the States, who are in, and yes, they've struggled. We'll talk about them a little bit. They've had maybe a bit of an up and down run through their pre-tournament games, but they're still the States. They're still the most talented team. They're still by far the favorites to win the tournament. They're likely going to be the number 1 seed on one side of the bracket. You can avoid them until the gold medal game. That's a good thing for your overall hopes. It would suck to run into them in the quarters by accident or something like that and have your tournament end early. Vegas, again, has Canada with the second best odds to win the tournament. They are in the toughest group, probably. Canada, the number 7 team in the world. Spain, number 2. Australia, number 5. And Greece, with Giannis, number 14. Group B, you have France, Germany, Japan, Brazil. The States are in Group C with Puerto Rico, Serbia, and South Sudan, who they just barely beat yesterday, a couple days ago. Time is fake. I don't know where time goes. Either way, Oren, thoughts on the pathway here, thoughts on the challenge of the group with Spain, Australia, Greece. Where do you want to start here when it comes to the pathway that Canada has to take? What has you sort of most interested, most worried, most sort of feeling encouraged? It's I think you can kind of look at it in a whole bunch of different ways here for Canada.
Yeah, I am not as worried as a lot of people are when it comes to the whole group of death talk. I think when you look at the tournament, I would say the best teams to me are Germany, Serbia, France, United States, and America, and Canada. None of the teams that I mentioned are in Canada's group, but I would say there's also no easy team in Canada's group. All the other teams have what you would all the other groups have what you would assume to be an easy game. Canada doesn't have one of those. All of those teams are going to be really competitive. But again, I don't think any of Spain, Greece, or Australia are juggernauts the same way even France and Serbia are. So you got to take care of business. You can't take any days off. There's no South Sudans in the group, which we can talk about later, but that's not like the most talented team in the world. And you assume that teams like Serbia and USA will be able to run up their point differentials against those teams. Canada doesn't have the luxury of that kind of game. But again, I don't think their group is like unbeatable or something. So if we go through it one by one, Australia obviously has like the name brand and has been a top program for many, many years, but they're like starting Patty Mills still, they're getting older, and that is just the reality of the team. Spain, on the other hand, is really young. They have this obviously culture and they play fantastic basketball, and they almost beat us at the World Cup. So I expect that to be probably Canada's most competitive game. But Spain is pretty young and inexperienced. So we'll see what happens there.
Outside of course, Raptors legend Lorenzo Brown.
Lorenzo Brown did join the team. That is true for this, and he wasn't at the World Cup. And then Greece, like if you're asking me who maybe gives me the most concerns, Greece, not because of their talent level, but because of just the matchup, like Giannis, obviously against Canada's lack of size, which we might get into a bit later, is just kind of a scary proposition. And I know that Greece hasn't been that great in these exhibition games, but hey, if like their guards who are not that talented have one hot shooting night and Giannis is just consistently getting into the paint and splashing it out to guys for threes, that kind of is the matchup that gives me the most concern, because we'll have Dylan Brooks on Giannis, I'm sure, but he's giving up a ton of height, and Dylan can only do what he can do. You get in foul trouble. It's ugly. So Greece is the team that gives me the most concerns.
That will be their first game Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern as well. Should be, we'll set the tone certainly for Canada when it comes to the group stage. It's a tiny sample. You can't screw up. It's 3 games. So yeah, that I think is a well taken point. I think the Spain matchup, they're just like always scare me because they're like super annoying and play beautiful basketball, and just like a FIBA-ass team all the time. So you can't take them lightly. But yeah, Greece with Giannis, it's daunting because of the positional deficit, I would say, this Canada team is working with. Would you say that the front court is kind of, it feels obvious, it feels like the chalk answer, but the biggest internal threat to Canada's chances of medaling, getting as far as we all want them to go on the men's side, it's got to be the front court, right? It's got to be just like Kelly Olynyk, Trey Lyles, Dwight Powell, Kem Birch trying to all stitch together. It could totally go very wrong, especially in the wrong matchup, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, I could look silly for saying Greece, but yeah, the front court is the most obvious internal kind of flaw of the team. But I also don't know if I would say like that's where things could go wrong. I just think basically we know what we're gonna get from the front court, right? And it's
sure.
Dwight Powell and Kem Birch, those guys are gonna fight their butts off, and they're gonna get a lot of fouls between the two of them, and they're gonna protect the rim just through smarts and positioning. But they're not 7-footers, they're not floor spacers, they're not lob threats. They're just not kind of like what you really, really want in these unicorns that like France has and the USA has and whatever. But we know what we're gonna get. I think Canada brought their best front court players. So it's not a critique on Canada basketball. I think like between Lyles and Birch and Olynyk, they upgraded for sure from the World Cup. And it's pretty good. It's just not great. And if you look at obviously the guards and the wings, by default, the front court is Canada's kind of biggest flaw. But internally, if Canada's not going to medal in this games, I would say it has more to do with whatever is happening with Jamal Murray. That's kind of my biggest concern right now, because again, you know what you're going to get with the front court. The whole kind of idea going into this Olympics was, okay, Jamal Murray is joining SGA in the backcourt. We could have the best backcourt in the world, and that raises the ceiling of this team to a medal contender. But you do have to be concerned as a fan of what we've seen from Jamal Murray so far, because this is a guy who hasn't played FIBA since 2015. I'm not sure if you remember this. That was the Pan Am Games. Came off the
Hell
bench
yeah,
for
I
Jay
remember
Triano.
that.
He scored 22 points as an 18-year-old in the fourth quarter in overtime to kind of will that team to win over Team USA. They lost to Brazil in the gold medal game, which goes to show just kind of like you can never take these teams for granted. But that was the last time Jamal Murray played. And then he played 17 minutes versus the USA, didn't play versus France. He was held out. He didn't travel with the team to France right away. He had something in Denver, a personal thing that he was given allowance from the team to do. Then he came back, missed the games versus France, played 7 minutes in the first half versus Puerto Rico. And Michael Grange had a story at Sportsnet today basically saying he's expected to play like 15 versus Brazil in a closed-door practice they have on Wednesday, and then maybe be ready for 20 minutes in their opener versus Greece. I mean, like, it's obvious that something is going on with Murray, whether it's health-wise or contractually, but you just never want to see this with international basketball. Like you mentioned, I'm writing a book. I've been doing a lot of research into the kind of history of Canada at these international competitions. And one thing that is clear is whenever they try to kind of give one of these NBA guys allowances and bring him in late and let him have more rest and whatever, it never works. Like you have to have a team. You have to have them play together for as long as possible to build that chemistry, because that is how you get to the point of, like you mentioned, Spain, who plays a beautiful brand of basketball and is consistent in every tournament. They don't have guys join the team late. They just don't. If an NBA player says, like, I can't play, whatever, then they're just going to say, okay, thanks, see you next summer.
Right.
So that's the tricky thing with Jamal Murray. And I think if you're asking me internally what could give Canada the most problem in this competition is if Jamal Murray is not at 100%.
That's a really well taken point. I guess the sort of insurance they might have there is Andrew Nembhard looks awesome and looked awesome in the playoffs. And you could still squint and argue that Shai plus Nembhard is maybe not the best backcourt in the tournament, but maybe second best, right? Like it still would be very much up there. So maybe that makes you feel a little better there. But yeah, Jamal Murray is extremely talented. He's a incredible big game player. We know this. It would be pretty crappy if he was not at full tilt for the tournament. Let me ask you this little fill in the blank question. Canada wins gold, or maybe not wins gold. Canada wins a medal if blank.
if the health and chemistry come together,
Yeah.
because it's not just that Jamal Murray isn't playing and that Andrew Nembhard could replace him. It's kind of the uncertainty around it for me
Sure.
is that Jordy doesn't even know who he's starting the first game, I don't
Yeah.
think. We don't really know. Lou Dort has been starting. I don't think that's looked good. I think Lou and the starters just haven't had enough movement and ball handlers. And so, yeah, you want to put Andrew Nembhard in there if Murray's not there, but then who's the point guard off the bench? It just gets tricky. So I think it's just more so that uncertainty of not knowing when they'll have Murray or at what or for how much health. So if he's healthy, everyone else is healthy, and they manage to quickly kind of build chemistry, even though Murray hasn't been playing a ton in games, you hope he's been going full through practices. That's how they can win a medal.
We're going to come back on the other side and get into the women's path and what they've got to go through. They have a tough group too. Three of the top 7 teams in the world in Canada's group. It's going to be a challenge. We're going to get into that coming up in just 1 second here and look at the biggest internal threats and the reasons why they will or will not go and medal in Paris. We'll do that in just a sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the single best place to buy tickets for the sporting events you want to go to. I am a very loyal Game Time customer. I use it all the time. In fact, the day I'm recording this podcast on Tuesday, I've used Game Time to go to the Toronto Blue Jays game tonight, and I got myself some cheap tickets, A, because the Blue Jays are bad, but B, because I used Game Time, and I used their wonderful flash deals to find the best seats in the house for me and my pals to go watch the Toronto Blue Jays play. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on Game Time actually go down close to the first pitch, which is awesome. And of course, you get all the wonderful upticks of using Game Time. Plenty of beautiful benefits, including last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off by buying last-minute tickets for sports, of course, comedy, concert, theaters, and more. Theater, blah. You got flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing. It's all there for you. Seat views, so you know exactly what you're getting when you buy, instead of arriving at the stadium and finding out, oh, no, I'm sitting behind a giant pillar. No, it isn't going to happen with you when you use Game Time. It is the best ticket app in the business for a reason. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, rounding things out here with Oren Weisfeld, talking about the women's side of things and the pathway for the women's team to get through the Olympic basketball tournament in Paris. Before we do that, just a reminder, Locked On Sports Today, 24/7, your all-day streaming channel on YouTube with Locked On shows covering all the biggest stories in sports from all of our local experts and our national shows. It's a great thing. If you're a football fan, camps are starting up. You can go check out all the biggest stuff coming out of NFL training camps over at Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 as well. Go subscribe. It's a great thing. All right. Oren, the women's side, I mentioned, tough group for them. They are in Group B, and they will be up against number 3 Australia in the world. Canada is number 5, number 7 France, and number 12 Nigeria. Group A is Serbia, Spain, China, and Puerto Rico. That's a pretty loaded group. And then the States are in Group C with Germany, Japan, and Belgium, who waxed Team Canada I guess 10 days ago at the time of recording this, 81-51. Emma Miesemann, obviously the star of that Belgian national team. Same tournament format as the men's side of things. The top 2 in each of the groups will move on, and the next best third place teams will move on as well to the quarterfinals. The top 2 overall group winners will be potted in opposite sides of the bracket. You can also not play a knockout game against a team from your group in the first round, I believe is how it's set up as well. So there's some weirdness. It's hard to predict exactly what the brackets will look like based on the standings, but we do know that the top 2 group winners will be 1 and 2 and on a collision course for the gold medal game. Thoughts on this path? It's not easy. Australia, very good. France, very good. Mourinho Hannes, obviously, a really big part of that team. Nigeria at number 12. It's the 12th best team in the world. This is a stacked group. Thoughts on Canada's chances here? We've talked about how maybe this is not the year they're going to go and do the thing necessarily, but overall impressions of the pathway for the women's side.
Yeah, I have PTSD, I remember, from watching Canada and Australia at the World Cup a couple years ago. So that was in the bronze medal game, and Australia kind of ran away with that thing. They were just way too big, way too physical. So that team is definitely one that will be a struggle for Canada. But like you said, the whole group is pretty stacked. I think any of these, Canada's also a really good team with 4 WNBA players. That's more than a lot of these teams. So it's like you said earlier. I mean, it's a wide open kind of field until you get to USA, which is probably going to win this thing. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have too much to say about the group itself, other than every game, I think they start off with Australia too. So that's you want that to at least remain competitive, especially for point differential purposes.
What would you say for the women's side? Are you looking at it as sort of like the biggest reason internally why they can go on a run here, like the biggest strength roster wise? And then on the other side of things, what's the thing that could potentially be their Achilles heel?
Yeah, I'll start with the Achilles heel. I just think it's kind of simple, but it's kind of just like talent and experience as a second thing. Like they don't have a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you mentioned that earlier, how the expectations change when you have a top player in the world, and you know that things are possible. And this team's going to be relying on people like, Kia Nurse and Bridget Carleton, their 2 best players, but neither of those players are kind of superstars. Neither of those players are the type of players who can just create an advantage and just every position. They kind of more so are, they need to get set up. They need a point guard and that kind of stuff. So I think just when you look at the talent, it's not what even teams like Australia and USA have. It's not really there. And then the other side is experience, which we also mentioned. They brought a bunch of young players: Silas Swords, Yvonne Edgem, Cassandra Prosper, Aaliyah Edwards. Like, these are college players, high school players, WNBA rookies who are just kind of, Aaliyah is a bit different, but some of them are just kind of there to wet their feet, get experience, so that 2028 won't be a surprise to them. So I think, yeah, internally, that's kind of the struggle. But on the flip side of the coin is, like, while the men's team just has to be the sum of their parts to win and to medal, I think this team has to be more than the sum of their parts. But they have shown enough flashes where they've played really good FIBA basketball under Victor LaPena, where you could actually imagine that to be true. Like, these people the women have way more experience playing FIBA than the men do. They have longer windows. They've played it since they were younger. They don't skip competitions like the men do. There's no one who, for example, haven't played since 2015, like Jamal Murray. So under Victor LaPena, I've been very impressed with this team. They just play on a string. They just play together. And so that's kind of the hope is, even though they don't have a ton of time to come together, they use the next kind of 10 days or so with their WNBA players on top of a long training camp in Victoria to become greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well put. It's an interesting thing too, because I'm not even really sure we know who's going to sort of emerge as like the best player on this team, right? Like who it's going to eventually sort of coalesce around. And like, to the point of playing good FIBA ball, you don't necessarily have to have that in the same way that you might in sort of more of an NBA, WNBA style. But Bridget Carleton is very good. Maybe not someone who's going to initiate the offense, but is having a very nice season. Obviously, Aaliyah Edwards, a really excellent rookie, by WNBA standards. And Kia Nurse has been around a long time. She's probably sort of the leader in the clubhouse when it comes to just sort of reps as the lead creator, even though it's maybe not gone as well for her in the last couple seasons in the WNBA as you'd like to have seen. It's been a bit of a bounce back this year, I'd argue, compared to what it was with Seattle for her last year, now playing with LA. But it's an interesting thing to kind of, imagine what the shape of this team is going to be once it all comes together. But that continuity, having the sort of familiarity with one another, playing a FIBA friendly style, all of that bodes well. I'll ask you the same thing. Canada medals in the women's tournament if blank.
If just off the top of my head, if their young players pop.
Right.
Because again, like, I respect all the W players and the people nearing the end of their careers and their last Olympic, Natalie Achonwa, Shea Colley, and Nira Fields. Like, but again, they just need a bit more talent to kind of put them over the edge. But like, if Silas Swords just somehow as an 18-year-old is able to give them really good minutes, I think a name to watch out for is Cassandra Prosper. She's one of my favorite prospects. She missed the whole season at Notre Dame with an injury, but she's back and she's been at training camp. And obviously it'll depend on her health. But if she is healthy, I think she gives them a really unique skill that they don't have at kind of the wing position as someone who can create their own shot a little bit and knock down threes. If enough of these young players, if Aaliyah Edwards has a breakout tournament, you know, she's kind of been started the season slow in the WNBA, but I think she's been coming on as of late. So like, if enough of these young players give the kind of like system that they already have, like the floor that they've already established, if they're able to add on to that and have good tournaments, that's how they can kind of outperform their expectations and also just like be really encouraging for like the future in 2028.
No doubt, man. Very excited for both tournaments. It's going to be a blast. We're going to cover it as best we can here on the podcast thread. Hopefully we can get you back on during the course of the tournament as well. We'd love to have that and your wonderful expertise. Anything you would like to promote for the good people out there before we send them off into mainlining the Olympics for 14 hours a day over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, man, I'm happy to come back anytime during the Olympics. Wrote a couple pieces previewing the games that will be out probably this weekend. One at The Guardian about Team USA and why I don't think they're a shoo-in to win it. And then one at
We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I knew you would. And then one at TVO about kind of how high school basketball has changed and how it's also shaped a lot of these guys on Team Canada, high school basketball in Ontario, that is. So those are the things I've been working on. And then obviously writing a book about the growth of Canadian basketball, kind of told through the lens of the national team. That'll be out next fall, 2025, but you can follow me on Twitter for updates on the book at Oren Weisfeld.
Surely the stuff going on in the next couple of weeks will feature heavily in that book, and it's very exciting times indeed. I can't wait to read it whenever it does drop. In the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. Very, very much appreciate it. We'll be back again next week as we dig into the Olympics, the opening games over the weekend. The Canada takes on Greece on Saturday. The women get rolling on Monday as well. So we'll do our best to talk about both of those games. If we don't get the women's game Monday, we'll do it Tuesday for sure. We'll have our Raptors stuff obviously woven in as well. If stuff happens when the Raptors sign Tyus Jones to fill the Sasha Vezenkov spot or whatever, we'll talk about that on the show. But in the
bring
meantime,
back Christian Koloko, man.
I'm in for that too. Why not both? Give Tyus 8, give Koloko 2, send someone else to the curb. That works, right? That's how math works on rosters. Yeah, that's how the cap works. The cap, very easy to understand in the modern NBA. It's very cool. Thanks, Adam Silver. Isn't it being a fan the best? Armchair GMing, just the best now. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for hanging out. We will talk to you again on Monday, another episode of Locked On Raptors. Enjoy the start of the Olympics. Bye-bye.